Make it plain.
Make it plain.
M.I.P.
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very important book is out. And this is a very important discussion to have right in the midst, really at the conclusion of Black History Month. The reopening of several unsolved murder cases in the civil rights era, several cases that really rocked the nation and changed the course of history in this country. My very special guest took it upon himself as a journalist and as an investigative journalist to look into these cases and to reopen them. As a journalism major myself, I'm sure he, like me, frets over the state of journalism these days, and we'll talk about that. Sure. But if it weren't for him and others like him that came before us, a lot of investigations like these probably would not have happened. And he was not in the friendliest of places going back in time down in Jackson, Mississippi. A few weeks ago, I was in Jackson with my son, and I took him to see the Medgar Evers home when we were there, and was just talking to him a bit about that history. And some of you also know my relationship with Dick Gregory, and Dick used to tell the story how he was in Jackson with Medgar. Mm-hmm. And his infant child passed away, and he had to go back to Massachusetts. Wow! But he was staying there, and it would have been in the home, in the family home. It would have been a likelihood that he and Medgar coming home together one night would have been in the car together and got on that carport. So we're happy to have with us the author of the new book, and he's making his rounds around the country. I strongly encourage you to read it. It really is gripping. Race Against Time. Jerry Mitchell is here in studio with us from Make It Plain. Jerry, welcome. How are you, man?
Doing great. Been on the road, still on the road. It's great.
And you're a popular guy too, because this is a great book.
Well, thank you. I think it's an important book, not because of me, but because of the stories it tells. These courageous families and courageous people like Medgar Evers and so many other people whose names aren't known. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
Just
true.
local people that worked in the movement, and we need to remember them too.
And I want to remind people too. What's hot on Netflix right now is this documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X?
Yes.
This book is like that too, if you want to stay in that genre.
Right.
Because Jerry's telling the story about these other cases, and now that I mention it, man, movie.
Yep.
You thinking about that? Have anybody approached you about that yet? Or
Actually, I have.
Okay. All right, then. That's where it's at.
Well, I think it would more likely be like a Netflix kind of thing.
Yeah, documentary.
Well, not documentary, but multi-part.
Yeah.
In terms of just from the standpoint of structure, I think it works better because you've got 4 cases.
That's right. And were there? We're going to get into the 4, but
sure,
were there other cases too?
Oh, yeah.
We had quite a few, but there was you
more than
these
120 cases.
Yeah. What called you to
these particular cases?
Well, what called you to do any of this, Jerry?
You know what Fannie Lou Hamer was quoted as saying one time was, someone asked her, supposedly, why'd you get involved in the civil rights movement? What made you choose to do that? And said, well, I didn't choose it. It chose me. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel that way about this. I don't feel like it's something I chose to do, but maybe it chose me.
Generationally, too, I mean, there was a time you worked for the main newspaper in Jackson.
Yeah, statewide newspaper, the Clarion Ledger.
I mean, there was a time when it wouldn't have even been safe for you to do this. And that's not to say it was safe your whole time you were there.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely correct.
And so I guess you had to navigate through a lot of that stuff. Editors and whatnot, were people always supportive, or did you always have to kind of push the envelope, or what?
I just had one editor who was kind of not so thrilled with this. The vast majority of them were very supportive, and but I certainly had blowback from readers, from callers, from Klansmen, different things like that, death threats, all those things. Yeah.
But again, now as the generations go by and new generations come along, I'm sure this has been. You've gotten more support and more people want to get
I have gotten more
this to be
support
resolved
over time.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So let's talk about some of the cases, and we alluded first of all to Medgar Evers, which was one of the most prominent cases, and the other prominent ones here as well. But Medgar Evers was a major force within the NAACP, the field secretary down in Mississippi.
Yes, he was
registering voters. You kind of helped to shed more light, because I remember Byron, and I want to say it right, is D-Lay. That's how he
called him. It was his nickname was D-Lay. Yeah, but Byron D. Beckwith. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, he was a character.
No kidding.
and
hardly racist too, I might add.
Yeah, and defiant, and he just said and did whatever he wanted to do.
Absolutely.
What was it that kind of cracked that case for you, and what moment was most revelatory for you?
Well, I mean, it was so many things happened. I'm trying to think if there's any particular one. I mean, I think going to visit him to me was revelatory to me. I mean, I never spent that much time with somebody, and he's so horribly racist, and it was, and I mean, I spent 6 hours with him. It was inward this, inward that, and then he started in on the other races, and he was very anti-Semitic, and he's a part of what's called Christian identity, and I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but it's very horrible kind of white supremacist religion, and really responsible for that philosophy has been responsible for a lot of violence here in the United States.
Yeah. He had 2 trials.
Yes,
and the juries were hung. And then finally there was another trial, and things went the way they were supposed to.
1994 he was convicted.
They went the way they were supposed to go. What was different in the trials in terms of the way they were carried out?
Well, in 1964, a few things. One is, interestingly, Merle Evers was called Mrs. Evers for the first time. Isn't that something?
Wow.
Because in Mississippi, African Americans would not be called by courtesy titles, which is hard to believe now, but it's true. Whereas if you were African American, you would not be called Mr. or Mrs.
Right.
You would be called by your first name.
By your first name. So she was just called Merle.
Well,
64.
actually, in 64, she told the prosecutor, if you call me that, I will object. And so the prosecutor in 64 actually didn't call her anything. Isn't that kind of fascinating?
That is interesting. Rather than say anything. You discovered that some of the machinations that went on in 64.
What I found out, there was an agency in Mississippi called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was a state segregation and spy agency. And all those records were sealed for 50 years, and I began to get leaks of those files. And what they showed was at the same time the state of Mississippi was prosecuting Byron D. Beckwith for the murder of Medgar Evers, this other arm of the state. The Sovereignty Commission was secretly assisting the defense, trying to get Beckwith acquitted, and nobody knew that.
Yeah. Was that...
That reopened the case.
And so the second time, or the third time around, I should say.
Right.
Was that a part of the evidence to show?
It wasn't part of the evidence, but it helped to prompt the district attorney's office to reopen the case.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of things that had to happen that did happen. Merle Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she had saved in a safety deposit box. Jackson police found a box. that contained the crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. Beckwith lifted from the murder weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet.
Yeah.
Which sounds like I'm making it up, but yeah, it really happened. Yeah.
The prosecutor in 64 or 94?
94.
Wow. So this is the new prosecutor, the modern-era prosecutor.
Yeah, Alec Baldwin played him in the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And the murder weapon was found in his father-in-law's closet.
Yeah, his father-in-law was a judge back in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my guess is they were getting rid of evidence one day, just throwing out the evidence in the case and say, hey, who wants the, this is my guess, hey, who wants the gun that killed Medgar Evers or whatever they said.
Mm-hmm.
Or who wants Byron D. Beckwith's rifle or whatever they said. I imagine it was probably the
truly small world.
Yeah. And so he took it home.
It was actually, I just need to tell you that it was actually on this show several years ago. Medgar Evers was a guest of mine.
Ah, what a wonderful woman. I know you know that.
Oh, yeah. But she decided impromptu,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you're aware of this, but she decided impromptu to open up about the days leading up to his death.
Yeah, she's talked to me about those.
When she asked the NAACP for help and security, they asked.
Yes.
And they refused.
Right.
The NAACP has apologized to her since. They did in a big, but she told the story, and it was as if we were in her living room.
Yep.
Where the conversation was had. And interestingly, she also said part of the rift was Medgar was also talking to Dr. King.
Yes, that's correct.
And he was thinking of inviting him. Dr. King kind of had a standing invitation to Jackson. And then the NAACP leadership felt, well, Dr. King is taking over. He's been such a force in every other city. If he takes over Jackson, he'll overshadow the NAACP once again.
Yeah, there was friction between him and the NAACP leadership.
The usual.
A little bit of a turf battle. A little bit of a turf battle.
And usually, we romanticize a lot in different eras, but people will always be human, won't they? And have those tensions and issues and egos, of course. Also, another notorious case, we talked to Doug Jones on the live show, I think, a few days ago, the senator from Alabama, was the 16th Street Baptist Church.
Which Doug prosecuted.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that one and what were kind of the breadcrumbs that attracted you.
Well, they were already, Doug and the prosecution team and the FBI had already been working on that for a number of years. All I was doing at that point was I had already been through 2 trials at that point and just kind of reporting about what other cases were being looked at out there, and reached out to Doug, went and interviewed him, ended up talking to Bobby Cherry, who's one of the last living suspects in that case, and months later his wife emailed me and invited me to come talk to Bobby, as she put it. And so I'm like, okay. So I drove over. He lived in Texas, not far from Tyler, Texas, which is not very far from where I grew up, which is the schizophrenic town of Texarkana. So
okay, all right.
I knew where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I drove over, met him and his wife, took him out for barbecue because that's what I guess you take Klansmen out for. I'm not really sure.
Noted.
And he was like, I didn't have anything to do with that church bombing. I left that sign shop at court to him because I had to get home and watch wrestling. Pulled out that sworn statement. Yes, It said, yes, I remember that night well. We're all watching wrestling. So I got back to the newspaper the next day and talked to our librarian, Susan Garcia, and just said, Susan, check what the Birmingham News was on TV that night. The next day, I got, an email from Susan. There was no wrestling. So,
and you just did that.
Yeah.
So, if it was a snake, it would have bitten anybody else. I mean,
you would think so, right?
Yeah, just something you happen to look up.
Yeah.
So that just came to you, or
it just kind of made sense. I mean, this is the way here's one of the earliest rules of journalism, and this is the way we say it in the South. Even if your mama tells you she loves you, check it out.
Check it out. You are truly a journalist, my friend.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. A lot of people would do that these days.
Yeah,
because everything has to be in like 700 words now anyway. So,
yeah, I know.
But we'll get into that.
They give me more than
that. Right. Well, thank God. You might be one of the last ones who has that privilege. And, of course, another case that is well known, and it was really a case of not just an African-American or African-Americans, but you had Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner.
Yes.
Talk to us about that one and how you got involved in that one.
Well, I got involved with it actually all the way back in 1989. I saw the movie Mississippi Burning, and got interested in that case, started writing about the case. That's a fictional movie about those killings, although I don't even recommend it necessarily. It's fictional, and we'll leave it at that. It's a long story about the movie, but the authorities really hadn't done anything about it. And then after Sam Bowers was convicted in the Vernon Damer case, again, we're kind of looking at other cases, at the process of that. I knew that Sam Bowers, who was involved in those killings, basically the orders in those killings, had given an interview with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, but it was sealed. And so I began to develop sources who had access to that, and they basically leaked it to me. And so I was able to read this interview that Sam Bowers gave, in which he talked about those killings and said there was a federal trial. No one had ever been charged with murder, but there was a federal trial in 1967, and he was actually convicted in that on federal charges, not murder charges, but federal conspiracy charges. And he said he was quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out the courtroom a free man. He was referring to Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen.
Yeah.
And so I called up Preacher Killen, and we talked for quite a while and said, there's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up, and I didn't have the heart to tell him it was me.
So he's just talking.
And so I took him and his wife out for catfish. Yeah. So.
Okay, so I'm just trying to keep taking notes here. Barbecue in Texas.
Catfish in Mississippi.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm keeping it. So
in case you need to make notes in case you got some Klansmen you need to talk to.
When I take a Klansman out to dinner.
Yeah, that's what you do. That's what you do. Take them out to eat. But he denied having anything to do with it. And I said, well, what do you think should happen if people were responsible? He said, I'm not going to say they were wrong. And then he proceeds to tell me this story about himself, just about himself. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968 in Memphis, the FBI had no idea who did it. So they just sent out agents to kind of the usual suspects. Two of them showed up at the doorstep of Preacher Killen, wanted to know his whereabouts on April 4th, 1968.
Is that right?
He wouldn't talk. They left their card. Time goes on. Preacher Killen one day picks up the card, calls the FBI agent, wants to know who killed King. And the agent's like, well, why do you want to know? And Killen says, man, I want to shake his hand. And, sometimes people see, in Mississippi and elsewhere, they see these photographs or footage of these old guys going off to trial, and they say to me, Jerry, why don't you just leave these old men alone? You know what I tell them?
What?
These are young killers. They just happen to get old.
Yeah. They sure were. And you also, Killen was out during his appeal.
Yeah, that's right.
And you got a lot of influence, man. You actually published a story. He claimed he was immobile.
Yeah, he said he couldn't raise his right hand. He couldn't. He couldn't even be out of his. He could only. He was either in the wheelchair or in bed. Was pretty much what he told the court.
Okay.
And so this is after he's convicted. After he gets 60 years, there's a hearing. There's a bond hearing, and the judge frees him. Yeah, he just gets to go home.
But you exposed that.
I exposed that
Later
wasn't
on.
true. Yeah.
How did you come by that information?
Well, I got an email from this is Mickey Schwerner's widow, who's Rita Bender, and so she sent me an email that she had gotten from somebody else who said that he had been spotted walking around, that Edgar Ray Killen had been spotted walking around, filling up his truck with gas. And so she put me in touch with the lady who sent the email, and then she turned out the guy who witnessed it was a deputy sheriff in another county. And so I printed that story. And then they ended up having a hearing, and he testified, and then there ended up being a whole bunch of other law enforcement testifying. And the judge basically said, all right, if you're going to have that kind of attitude, you're going to, you're going to lie to this court, and you're going to prison.
But your journalism prompted a hearing that got a judge to lock him up.
Yep.
All right, so just another that we've learned about barbecue.
Yeah, the judge called me the next morning.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. It was on a Saturday, weirdly enough. I just happened to be at the office, but it was during the middle of Hurricane Katrina coverage, so I was there.
And what did he say?
Well, he was interested. He was curious if the person who told me this was credible. And I said, well, he's a deputy sheriff.
Wow.
And he mentioned that he might have a hearing on it. So.
Okay. So I've learned a lot from you already.
Mm-hmm.
Barbecue in Texas.
That's right.
In
That's catfish.
And you have the ability to influence judges' rulings with your journalism. So we need to sign you to Michael Flynn and Roger Stone's cases, don't we? Can we do that? Think we can make that happen real quick? You had that kind of juice, man. I don't know of any other case recently where a judge has looked to a journalist to get help with that. All right, and then the case of Vernon Dahmer, who was also an NAACP activist. On January 10, 1966, right. Ku Klux Klan firebombed his home.
He died defending his family.
Yeah. The case needed to be. What happened with the case? Well, people were tried for that case at first.
There were several people who were convicted, and it was a bit of a joke. Like the governor commuted their sentence or pardoned them or released them on work release or, it was that kind of thing, unfortunately. And so, but the guy who ordered it, Sam Bowers, the head of the White Knights of the KKK, which was the most violent Klan organization in the United States, responsible for at least 10 killings, he was never convicted.
Wow. So there was a reopening.
It was reopened. They met with me. I did a story. The Dahmer family met with me. I did a story. They met with me after Byron D. Beckwith got indicted, which was in December of 1990. So that spring, they met with me. They then met with the district attorney. He reopened the case. He acted interested and seemed like he was doing things, but pretty quickly got cold feet. Then he left office. Then another district attorney came in. And it looked like nothing was going to happen. I got an offer to go to grad school to Ohio State, and I'm literally in Ohio in spring of 1997 and get this telephone call from this guy who wouldn't identify himself but said he had information in the Dahmer case and wanted to meet with me. So I flew back to Mississippi and met with him, and there were two sons of Vernon Dahmer, and he was there with his buddy. There were a lot of guns there that day, I think. And anyway, it turned out the guy used to work for Sam Bowers. Mm-hmm. He was a recovering gambling addict, and one of the 12 steps is to make amends for the bad stuff you've done in the past. He worked for Bowers, and it actually overheard Bowers give the orders to kill Vernon Dahmer.
Is that right?
So he came forward, and then the authorities kind of reopened the case in earnest.
Well, and once again, too, your writing about the story allowed the Mississippi legislature to help
Yeah, they got
set aside some money because it was.
Well, this was with the first DA. They said they needed an investigator, and then I wrote about it, and they funded another investigator for him. You know what I mean? So there's different little things like that. The first DA had kind of a series of excuses. He said he didn't have the FBI files, so I wrote about it. The FBI turned around and gave him the files.
Wow.
So, yeah, or let him view it. And eventually, the Attorney General from Mississippi, Mike Moore, was able to get Janet Reno to share the entire case file with him.
And then there was a character named Nix.
Oh yeah. I can tell that story if you want to.
Please.
So
there's someone else you busted.
Yeah. So Sam Bowers gets arrested. This is now May of 1998. He's arrested. This is after Billy Roy Pitts basically starts cooperating, one of the key witnesses from the previous trials. And so Sam Bowers is arrested along with his right-hand guy. His name was Devers Nix. And when the family brought Devers Nix in, it was like the most pitiful sight you've ever seen. They were like wheeled him into the wheelchair. He had like one of those green oxygen tanks he's breathing out of, and they wheeled him up in front of the judge, and he's like, "I can't take more than a couple steps without needing oxygen, Judge." So the judge is like, "Well, I normally do this."
That's pretty good.
Thank you. Thank you. I do the audiobook too. Anyway, he's like, well, judge is like, "I normally don't let people out without bond, but I'll let you out without, I'll make an exception." So a dozen days later, this is like a reporter's dream. We catch him on the golf course.
How? How did you find out he would even be there?
Well, it's in the book. He actually told me where he was going to play golf and where and what time. The whole thing. Like, I didn't ask a single question.
Wow.
But it just goes to show, and a lot of people don't, about reporting that people don't think about, is you actually, at least in the South you do this, you engage in small talk.
That's true, right.
And so one of the things he and I had talked about before, I found out he was a huge golf fan. And I talked one day for 20 minutes to him about the Masters. And he was like a huge fan of the Masters. Mm-hmm. And of course, you find ways to connect with people. Go, "Oh, yeah, my dad loves the Masters." So we're talking. He's talking to me endlessly about golf. So I call him. I'm talking to him about the case, about something, some kind of question. He says, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to be down there at Bear Creek Golf Club at 8:30 in the morning." And I go to my editor and go, "You want me to print this?" And she goes, No, don't publish that. We'll just send a photographer. So that's what we did. Rather than put it in the paper, we sent a photographer and we documented it. And then we did the story.
Wow.
And he got arrested. We ran like before and after pictures, like him in the wheelchair, him playing golf. Yeah, so he got arrested.
So again, someone else claiming to be immobile.
Yep.
You exposed. So all of you Ku Klux Klan members who are listening, Jerry, don't tell Jerry.
Don't tell me anything. Right?
Don't tell him you can't move, because Jerry's going to find out you're not telling the truth and bust you. So all you Ku Klux Klan members better get that. Also, the judicial branch you have influence over, obviously the legislative branch as well. We should have had you cover impeachment, man. Maybe that would have made a difference too. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know if I had that kind of power.
Now, you have founded the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting.
Yes, absolutely.
How much would it cost me to round up some of our colleagues in Washington, New York, and send them there so they can be re-educated about? There's some people.
I would love that.
There's a big building up the street. What's the name of that paper? Is it New York Times? Yeah, I'm sure there's some people up there that could.
Hey,
is this for young people, or can people who are already kind of played out?
Anybody. We're we just, as long as we have funding, if they get funding for them to come down, absolutely.
Wow.
Come on down. We'd love to. Mississippi needs more investigative reporting, not less, and that's part of the problem. The newsrooms are vanishing completely in Mississippi. Our stories that we've written so far, and we've covered a variety of areas: mental health, public education funding, and especially a lot about prisons. We basically told Mississippi officials that the prisons were going to blow up, and of course they ended up blowing up in December.
Yeah. I had some friends down there involved right now and some activism around Parchman.
Yep,
and
that's what I've been writing
there.
about. I just did a big expose on Parchman.
Well, you know how when you're on Twitter and
No, you don't necessarily know what stories are.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much information coming at you. I could have sworn I saw something the other day that one of the issues there, and since you're reporting, I guess you would know, is that the workers there.
Yeah, they're only paying $25,000 a year.
Yeah,
which you realize that qualifies them and their family for food stamps.
Wow. So that's
the lowest paid in the entire country, and the legislature refuses to raise the salaries. So you tell me how you're going to fix that. You get what you pay for, and if you're going to, and you understand that maybe it's a lower paying job, but you can't pay people so little, and expect to have professional staff.
Yeah, that's
and I've talked to gang leaders, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's easy to corrupt the guard." So I always walk up to them and go, "Hey, little lady, how'd you like to make $1,000?"
Wow. Yeah, and is easy. Someone, Paul Farri, tweeted this the other day, just in terms of the state of our industry. Sure. If you take the newsroom head count at the New York Times, 1,700 people.
Right.
The Washington Post, 850, and the Wall Street Journal, which is about 1,000 to 1,200.
Right.
Those three newspapers employ nearly 1 of every 5 newspaper journalists left in the United States.
That's probably right. Yeah.
Well, what's going to happen to us, man?
Well, I think that's why we started the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. We realized the nonprofit model is working. ProPublica is doing a great job. I worked with them for the past year investigating prisons. Marshall Project, they've done some reporting on prisons as well. They're excellent. There's just a ton of really good journalism nonprofits right now, and we just need in Mississippi. We need investigative reporting. I mean, the problem that I've seen in Mississippi this way, regular reporting doesn't move the needle. It's investigative reporting.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to really dig, and a lot of times public officials will try to stop you from doing stories or not release documents to you or whatever, not tell you what's going on. And so that's why we started it. And we are indeed a nonprofit. And so anybody who has ideas for people to help us out and help with the funding, we'd love to hear about it.
Well, folks, be on the lookout because he's on a world tour right now.
That's right. They got me busy.
Race Against Time, a reporter reopens the unsolved murder cases of the civil rights era. Because as people were watching the Netflix documentary on Malcolm X, one of the main people died like days before someone could go talk to him.
Yep.
And when I think about Race Against Time, did you run into that a lot? Did the trail go cold with a few folk like that?
Well, I know there was one in particular I remember distinctly. One of the Klansmen who basically he had this is where the bodies were buried, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. And so I found out that of someone who lived, was living there at the time when the bodies were buried. The person who owned the property, Olin Burridge, claimed he didn't know anything about it. Like they came somehow, these Klansmen came onto his property and buried those bodies without any knowledge. Of course, one of the confessions in this claimed that he led them to the place, and he even gave them gasoline to burn up the station wagon, which, by the way, is the cover of the book is the burned out station wagon.
Wow.
So,
are you still looking into any cases right now?
I am open to them. The problem has been almost every case I know of, like the suspects are dead or the witnesses are dead. Doug Jones, for example, with regard to the Bobby Cherry case, told me a year after the Bobby Cherry was convicted, so many witnesses had died within that year. Actually, they couldn't have prosecuted the case even a year later.
Wow.
So that's kind of what kind of race against time it is.
Yeah.
And I'm all for, getting as many of these guys as we can, but we're not going to begin to get how many there actually were, obviously.
We also had here on the show the gentleman who was in the car with Viola Liuzzo.
Yeah, exactly.
And he told that story and how he had to play possum.
Right.
He had to pretend to be dead so they wouldn't kill him.
Wouldn't be killed.
Yeah,
exactly.
So,
and that whole Luzo thing. The informant in that case.
Right.
It's very troublesome. That whole sequence of events, and I'm not necessarily convinced that he wasn't involved in it.
Yeah. Is that the same person that? Well, he was with the FBI. He was informing on behalf of the FBI.
He was informant for the FBI.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know. I suspect he may have shot her. I don't know if he did or not. I can't prove it one way or the other.
Yeah. We even see in the Malcolm X documentary a lot of FBI fingerprints everywhere.
Well, with the informants, you're dealing, like, you have a Klansman who's an informant, but what if they're continuing to carry out violence?
Yeah.
Or like a Scarpa. He was Gregory Scarpa, who actually came into play in the Vernon Dahmer case. He was a mobster, essentially. I think he killed 13 or 14 people. I mean, you're using these guys. You know what I mean? These are not good guys.
Yeah.
And may have taken advantage of that.
Yeah. In any of these cases, let me just ask you this.
Sure.
Since we brought up the FBI. Where does Hoover figure in any of these?
He hated the civil rights movement, claimed they were all communists. They were doing their best to link King to communism. Oh, I mean, he was fighting against it the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I think that what happened was with the Mississippi burning case,
mm-hmm.
he kind of got, because of LBJ's, the President Johnson's, push on that Hoover, I guess, felt there was no way he had to. It meant more, more agents for him, essentially. He was willing to accept the more agents, even though he didn't. I mean, obviously, he did everything to discredit King. It's clear the FBI wanted King to commit suicide. I mean, there are all these things that the FBI did.
Yeah. And in some of these cases, could they not have been more helpful?
Yes. Well, I think they were real reluctant because of the past to help. Like in a prosecution that predates these, it was over in Alabama, and I mentioned it. Bob Chambliss was convicted by Alabama authorities, state of Alabama, in 1977. Well, Bill Baxley, who was prosecuting that, had a heck of a time getting any kind of FBI cooperation, because they didn't trust Alabama authorities. Right. And the same thing started with the Byron D. Beckwith case. The FBI didn't trust Mississippi authorities, and so it was eventually they came around.
Yeah. Race Against Time, folks. A reporter reopens the unsolved murder cases of the civil rights era. Jerry Mitchell, really some incredible work, and thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
For what you have done in terms of shedding light and exposing this. I know the families are grateful, and all of us, really.
Well, I tell you what, I hope that's what the story people get as well, is the story of these courageous families, that were willing to stand up and persevere.
Yeah. I'm just going to schedule, and one thing stands out to me right here.
Sure.
You'll be in Jackson on March 18th with Merle and Rena Evers.
Right.
So that'll be great. That's one place he'll be, folks, and be sure to look for him around your neck of the woods as well. Jerry, thank you, man.
Thank you so much.
God bless you, my friend.
God bless
Jerry
you.
Mitchell.
Thank you so much.
Jerry Mitchell. Thank you for listening to Make It Plain and Get Woke. Remember to listen, like, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe to Make It Plain and Get Woke daily. Check out makeitplain.com to subscribe. If all minds are clear, it has been made plain.